Hello, everyone. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's this: happiness is often about subtraction, not addition. In my 50s, I didn't find joy in chasing more success, more approval, more stuff. I found it by letting go. The truth is, the second half of life invites us to quit the things that once seemed essential, but now weigh us down. What I quit in my 50s didn't just make room in my calendar, it made room in my soul. I want to share with you 11 things I quit in my 50s that made me happier, freer, and more at peace in my 60s. But today, we'll focus on 6 key things that truly transformed me. For most of my adult life, approval was my compass. I measured the worth of my decisions by the reactions I received from others, coworkers, family, friends, even strangers. I was fluent in the language of people pleasing. I'd tailor my words to avoid offense, mold my personality to fit in, and deny my truth if I sensed it might make someone uncomfortable. But slowly, without even realizing it, I was losing myself. Approval had become a substitute for authenticity, and while people liked me, I wasn't sure anyone truly knew me. In my 50s, something inside me cracked, not in a dramatic, life falling apart kind of way, but like a silent rebellion. I couldn't keep pretending. The cost was too high. I began to notice how much of my emotional exhaustion stemmed from the fear of disapproval. Before speaking in meetings, I'd second-guess every sentence. When choosing what to wear or post online or even cook for dinner, I asked myself, what will they think? Not what do I want or what feels right to me, but will this be acceptable? It's a subtle form of self-abandonment that accumulates over time. Each small act of silencing myself became a brick in a wall that separated me from my true identity. I was over-functioning, over-explaining, and over-extending myself for people whose approval I may not have even needed. It wasn't courage. It was fear in disguise. What's tricky about approval is that it's addictive. The nod of acceptance, the pat on the back, the compliment, it feeds the illusion that we're safe and valued, but it's conditional. It can be withdrawn. And when you build your sense of self-worth on something as unstable as others' opinions, you live in a constant state of emotional vulnerability. The fear of disappointing someone, of not being liked or included, was dictating how I showed up in the world. I wasn't living, I was performing. And while that performance earned applause, it never brought peace. In my 50s, I decided to test a new idea. What if I told the truth, even if it made someone uncomfortable? The first time I said, no, without giving a detailed excuse, my hands were trembling, but the world didn't end. The second time I disagreed openly in a meeting, I braced for backlash and was surprised to find that I was actually respected more, not less. Every time I chose authenticity over approval, I felt a little stronger, a little clearer, a little more whole. It was as if the real me had been waiting behind the curtain all along, hoping I'd stop playing the part and step into the light. Of course, I lost some things in the process. Certain relationships faded, some people pulled away, and there were moments of real discomfort. But what I gained was far more valuable: self-trust. I began to recognize the voice inside me as valid, even sacred. I no longer asked the room to tell me who I was. I told the room. And as that inner voice grew louder, my life began to feel like it actually belonged to me. I stopped asking for permission to be myself. That was the beginning of emotional freedom, not needing everyone to like me, because I had finally decided to like myself. Looking back, I realized that the chase for approval wasn't just a habit. It was a survival strategy I learned early in life. Many of us are taught that to belong, we must conform, To be loved, we must perform, but true belonging never requires the betrayal of self. When I quit chasing approval in my 50s, I wasn't becoming rebellious or rude. I was becoming real. And it's astonishing how much lighter life becomes when you stop carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. It's not that I don't care what others think. I just don't let it lead me anymore. Approval is no longer my compass. Integrity is. For decades, I wore "I'm fine" like armor. It rolled off my tongue before I even knew what I was feeling. Someone would ask how I was doing, and I'd smile, nod, and say, "All good." But it wasn't always good. Sometimes it was lonely. Sometimes it was overwhelming. Sometimes it was just empty. But the world didn't really want the messy truth, or so I believed. So I packaged my pain, painted on resilience, and walked around with a carefully constructed image of being in control. In my 50s, though, something shifted. The weight of pretending became heavier than the fear of being real. I started to realize that fine had become a reflex, not an emotion. It was a cover story, a shortcut. And the more I said it, the more it distanced me from my own truth. I was bypassing grief, ignoring exhaustion, and numbing vulnerability. But pretending to be okay didn't make the pain go away. It just buried it deeper. And buried pain doesn't disappear. It leaks out in other ways through irritability, anxiety, insomnia, even physical symptoms. My body was holding what my mouth refused to say. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was that emotional honesty isn't weakness. It's strength in raw form. Saying, "I'm struggling," doesn't make you fragile, it makes you brave. In my 50s, I began to practice radical honesty with myself first. I stopped minimizing my feelings. I stopped shaming myself for not having it all together. I gave myself permission to break down, cry, rest, say no, and ask for help. And slowly, I discovered that when you tell the truth about your pain, you don't fall apart. You start to come together. I also learned that pretending to be fine keeps people at a distance. It creates walls instead of bridges. You can't build real intimacy on a foundation of performance. When I started to open up about the struggles I had hidden, aging parents, a failing marriage, fear of irrelevance, my own changing body, I found something unexpected: connection. People leaned in, not away. They said, "Me too." And for the first time in years, I felt seen, not for how strong I appeared, but for how real I was. There's a sacred kind of healing that happens when we speak our truth. It doesn't require fixing or advice, just space to be human. I stopped trying to be the one who always had it together, always had the answers, always kept it light. I became someone who could sit with discomfort, mine and others, and that shift didn't weaken my relationships. It deepened them. Vulnerability became a doorway to belonging. And it started with the simplest, hardest thing: telling the truth. By quitting the act of being fine, I began to live a fuller emotional life. I cried more, laughed deeper, rested when I was tired, and asked for hugs when I needed them. I stopped chasing a perfect version of myself and started honoring the imperfect, messy, beautiful reality of who I was. And the freedom I found wasn't loud. It was quiet and grounding. I didn't need to be everything for everyone. I just needed to be myself. And that was finally enough. Somewhere along the way, we were sold a lie that doing more at once means living better. I believed it for years. I thought multitasking was a badge of honor, a sign that I was efficient, important, and ahead of the game. I could answer emails while cooking dinner, listen to my partner while texting a colleague, and schedule appointments during family time. But I didn't notice the cost, not right away. What I gained in productivity, I lost in presence. By the time I reached my 50s, I realized I hadn't been fully present for most of my life. I had just been managing it. Multitasking made me feel powerful on the surface, but underneath, I was constantly scattered. My attention was fragmented, my energy drained, and my mind was never fully where my body was. Conversations blurred together. I forgot moments right after they happened. I was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I was accomplishing things, sure, but I wasn't experiencing them. I couldn't tell you what my coffee tasted like in the morning or the look on my friend's face when she shared good news. I was doing, but I wasn't living. What finally made me stop wasn't burnout. It was emptiness. I remember sitting in a beautiful cafe one afternoon, laptop open, phone buzzing, checking off a dozen things from my to-do list. I had just finished 3 work calls and made dinner reservations, but when I looked up from my screen, I saw nothing. I had no memory of the song that was playing, the smell of the coffee, or the people around me. I had been there. That I hadn't been there, that moment hit hard. I realized I was missing my own life, one distraction at a time. So I began to practice doing one thing at a time, slowly, intentionally, and with full attention. It felt unnatural at first, even wasteful. My brain screamed, "You could be doing more!" But I resisted the urge. I listened to one person at a time without checking my phone. I went for walks without earbuds. I made meals without multitasking. It was uncomfortable at first, like stepping off a treadmill I'd been running on for decades. But with every act of single tasking, I reclaimed something I didn't even know I'd lost: depth. Depth in conversations, depth in relationships, depth in my own thoughts. I started to notice things, the way the light fell on my kitchen counter in the morning, the sound of my dog's paws on the floor, the way my heart softened during a hug. And these moments, small as they were, began to stitch my life together in a way multitasking never could. I wasn't just passing through time. I was inhabiting it. Living in full presence became a daily act of gratitude, and it changed the texture of everything. Now, I don't strive to be the most productive person in the room. I strive to be the most present. I've learned that true richness isn't in how much I can squeeze into a day. It's in how deeply I experience what's already there. By quitting multitasking in my 50s, I didn't just slow down, I came home to myself. And that home is filled with the kind of moments you can't schedule, manage, or optimize, only feel. For most of my life, I thought holding a grudge was a form of self-protection. If someone hurt me, I would wrap my anger tightly around that wound and carry it with me like armor. I believed that staying angry kept me safe, that if I forgave too quickly or too easily, it would mean letting them off the hook or inviting more hurt. So I held on. I kept a quiet mental list of betrayals, unspoken words, broken promises. I didn't talk about them, but I didn't forget them either. And while I believed I was standing strong, the truth was I was staying stuck. Over time, I realized grudges are deceptively heavy. They start off feeling like protection, a boundary, a consequence, a declaration of your worth. But in reality, they are chains. The more I held on to the pain others caused me, the more I allowed that pain to define me. I'd rehearse old arguments in my head, replay scenarios where I came out on top, wish for closure that never came. And none of it gave me peace. It only drained me. What I thought was power was actually poison, slow and subtle, but incredibly damaging. It wasn't until my 50s that I began to understand what forgiveness really is and what it's not. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean excusing or reconciling or inviting someone back into your life. Forgiveness is simply the decision to stop carrying a burden that was never yours to hold forever. It's a way of saying, I choose to stop bleeding from a wound you caused. That shift in understanding cracked something open in me. I wasn't forgiving people because they deserved it. I was doing it because I deserved peace. The first time I consciously let go of a grudge, it felt like betrayal of myself. It felt like saying, what you did didn't matter, but that was a lie. What they did mattered. It hurt. It changed me. But holding on to the pain didn't undo it. It only kept me reliving it. So I started writing down what I was still holding on to, the names, the stories, the incidents that still had emotional charge. And one by one, I began to release them, not because the people apologized, most didn't, but because I was ready to stop giving them power over my peace. Something beautiful happened when I began to forgive. I made space. Space in my heart, my mind, and my life. I had more emotional energy. I could sleep better. I smiled more. The anger that used to sit just beneath the surface softened. I didn't realize how much those grudges had taken from me until they were gone. I also started to understand people differently. I saw how many of the hurts I endured were from people carrying their own unresolved pain. This didn't excuse them, but it helped me release the need to carry their behavior around as part of my identity. In my 60s, I don't carry as much anymore. Not because I've had fewer disappointments, but because I've learned to travel light. Resentment is too heavy. Bitterness takes up too much room. And I want my heart to be spacious enough to hold joy, creativity, connection, and compassion. Forgiveness, for me, became a discipline, not a moment. Sometimes I still feel the sting of old wounds, but I remind myself I'm not defined by what happened to me. I'm defined by how I choose to heal. And choosing to quit holding grudges was one of the most powerful decisions I've ever made. For as long as I can remember, my body was something I monitored, criticized, and tried to control. I measured it against impossible standards. Thinner, tighter, younger, prettier. I stood in front of mirrors not to see myself, but to scan for flaws. Every wrinkle was a failure, every pound a setback. And worse, I believed the lie that how my body looked determined how much value I had in the world. It wasn't about health, it was about approval. I wasn't nurturing my body, I was managing it like a problem to be fixed. By my 50s, the years of judgment had piled up. My body was changing in ways I couldn't reverse, no matter how disciplined I tried to be. Hormones shifted, energy declined, skin softened, and something in me began to crack, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. I couldn't keep fighting the natural process of living. I was tired of calling my body the enemy. I was tired of feeling ashamed of a vessel that had carried me through decades of life, love, pain, and joy. So I asked myself a radical question: what if my body isn't the problem? What if the war I've been fighting is unnecessary? The moment I stopped judging and started listening, everything changed. I began treating my body with compassion instead of critique. I ate when I was hungry, not to punish or reward myself. I moved because it felt good, not to burn off guilt. I dressed in clothes that made me feel comfortable and strong, not smaller or invisible. I started thanking my body for what it could do, not resenting it for what it couldn't. That shift in mindset wasn't dramatic, but it was deeply healing. It gave me space to exist in my body with kindness instead of shame. I realized I had internalized cultural messages that equated worth with appearance, especially for women. We are taught that aging is something to fight, to fix, to delay. But what if aging is something to honor? What if the wrinkles, the softness, the slowness, what if these are not signs of decline, but of wisdom lived and earned? I began to see the marks on my body as a living record of survival, of motherhood, of years spent showing up for people I love. My body was never broken. It was simply evolving, and it deserved respect. That self-compassion opened a door to a deeper, more spiritual kind of body acceptance, not vanity, not perfection, but reverence. I found joy in simply being in my body, in walking barefoot in the grass, in stretching, in deep breaths, in feeling the sun on my face. I had spent so long trying to change how my body looked that I forgot to experience it. And once I did, I realized the freedom that comes when you stop seeing your body as an object to be judged and start seeing it as a partner in your life. Now, in my 60s, I no longer chase youth. I chase aliveness. I want strength, not thinness. I want energy, not applause. And most of all, I want peace with the body that has carried me this far and continues to show up for me every single day. Quitting the war with my body didn't happen overnight, and some days the old voices try to creep back in. But now I meet them with compassion and truth. My body is not a problem. It's a home, and I've finally decided to live in it with love. For most of my life, someday, was a place I lived in without realizing it. It was always just a little out of reach, right around the next achievement, the next milestone, the next time I had more time, more money, more energy, more clarity. I told myself I'd rest someday, travel someday, start painting again someday, make time for the people I love someday. And the tricky thing about someday is that it sounds noble. It feels like preparation, but in reality, it's a trap, a way of delaying joy, postponing presence, and turning life into a checklist rather than a lived experience. My 50s arrived with a kind of urgency I hadn't expected. Life started to feel shorter, not in a panicked way, but in a clear-eyed one. I began to see just how much time I had spent deferring what truly mattered because I was too busy being responsible, productive, or afraid. I thought I had to earn joy, that I had to prove myself worthy of rest, love, fun, or adventure. But then I asked myself a question that stopped me in my tracks. What if someday never comes? What if the life I keep planning for is already happening and I'm missing it? The truth hit hard. I looked back on moments I could never get back, opportunities missed because I thought it wasn't the right time. I realized that the calendar doesn't protect you from regret. It doesn't guarantee that one day you'll finally feel ready. We think we have more time than we do to heal relationships, to pursue passions, to be with the people who matter. But time is a currency, and we spend it whether we're aware of it or not. And once it's gone, it's gone. That realization didn't make me panicked. It made me present. So I stopped waiting. I booked the trip without waiting for the perfect season. I said yes to dinner with friends instead of reorganizing my to-do list. I printed the photos, lit the candles, wore the good perfume, opened the wine, wrote the letter. I began treating ordinary moments as if they mattered, because they do. I realized joy doesn't just live in the extraordinary. It lives in the now, in the laughter during a Tuesday lunch, in the book you've read a dozen times, in the quiet walk with someone you love. I had spent so long planning for a better time that I missed the sacredness of this time. What surprised me most was how much beauty had been sitting right in front of me unnoticed. When I quit living for someday, I started noticing the small things, the shape of a cloud, the warmth of a familiar hand, the sound of my own laughter. I started looking people in the eye longer. I made space for slow mornings and messy conversations. The joy I had been saving up for a special occasion, it was always available. I just had to stop waiting for permission to feel it. Now in my 60s, I no longer delay joy. I no longer chase the illusion of a future moment where everything is finally perfect. I've learned that this right here, right now, is the life I've been waiting for. It's not flawless. It's not always easy, but it's mine. And by quitting the habit of waiting for someday, I didn't just reclaim my time, I reclaimed my life. As I look back on my 50s, I don't see a decade of loss. I see a decade of letting go. I didn't quit these things because I was giving up. I quit them because I was growing up. I stopped chasing perfection, approval, and exhaustion. I stopped performing for a world that rarely claps for your healing. And in the space that was left behind, that quiet, unfamiliar space, I found something unexpected: peace, joy, presence, a version of myself that didn't need fixing, just truth. My 60s are not defined by what I've added, but by what I've released. I've shed the pressure to prove, the weight of resentment, the noise of business. And what remains is a deeper connection to others, yes, but more importantly, to myself. I've learned that the most powerful transformation doesn't come from doing more. It comes from choosing less. Less pretending, less pleasing, less waiting, more living. You don't have to reach a certain age to begin this journey. You don't have to hit a milestone to give yourself permission to rest, to say no, to tell the truth, to live on your own terms. You just have to decide you're ready to quit what no longer serves you, not because life is over, but because it's finally beginning. Thank you.